Hey everyone, and welcome to my round one recap of the 2024 FIDE Candidates, which just started just a bit earlier today in Canada. And don't want to spoil all of the results just yet for those who haven't seen it. It was a round with some interesting games. We had the matchups of Caruana-Nakamura, Abasov against Nepomniachtchi, Firouzja against Praggnanandhaa, and Gukesh against Vidit. So let's have a look at these games. You can enjoy my recap and analysis of the games. And the first game, Caruana-Nakamura, already saw a little bit of a surprise in the opening, where previously, Hikaru normally played the move a6, but in this game he went for this sideline of e5, and sort of the idea of playing a6 is kind of to prepare e5, saying that if e5 is played immediately, that white will play to move bishop to b5 check, as Caruana did in the game. And then whether you block with the bishop or the knight, white's going to end up getting this knight to f5 and just having this quite unpleasant pressure against the d6 pawn. This is how the game went. a6, b5, knight c5, just defending the pawn, eyeing the bishop and the pawn as such. White played to move bishop to g5 to defend against it. And after take, bishop e7, we end up with this opposite colored bishop position out of the opening, which previously was thought theoretically to be kind of better for white, because white's bishop is a lot more active than black's, and they have some quite good control over the light squares as such. But this game showed, with the move of e4, that black's position maybe is not as bad as was previously thought here. Just freeing the bishop, and obviously if we can double the white pawns, that would be a pretty nice achievement. So if you are enjoying this video, by the way, do make sure to leave a like and to consider subscribing. In the game, white played this move of knight takes e4. It is true white could also play queen d5 and play it in this way, which is something that I expect we'll see more of in later games with this variation. Maybe not in the candidates, because I think that Nakamura probably intended this just as a one-game weapon rather than his main system. But the game saw knight e4 takes, and white decided to regain the piece with rook e1 instead. Note that black can't really keep that extra piece alive, because the bishop d5 fork is going to regain it with interest very, very quickly. So black just gives back the piece. We have bishop takes b2, and in this simplified position, it's sort of interesting to look at these opposite colored bishop positions in general with the major pieces on the board. Because these sort of positions typically favour the side with the initiative, and so Caruana's move of queen d5 and just not letting black develop the rook does make a lot of sense. Black played the move rook c8, and you can also see from the clock times, black had been playing very quickly to this point, and only with rook c8 do you start to use a little bit of time, where it's probably more likely that bishop d5 was a bit more the focus of Nakamura's preparation, just because this is the top line of the engine, trying to open up the position for the rooks, as it were. But here too, black probably should be okay with best play. But queen d5 was something a little bit different, where Caruana, I think, makes set a few practical problems, where with queen b7 there is an attack on the pawn, and it's still not so easy for black to, develop his rook from f8 in a sense. Still, I think that Nakamura handled it quite well. I do like his move of rook to c5. The engine also mentions the alternative of d5 and saying that you're able to take on c2 if they take on d5, but the move in the game is also totally fine. Queen a6, rook f5, and material is still equal, but we can see that the pressure on the d6 pawn does mean black still has a few problems to solve, and after d5 and rook to b4, preparing to take the pawn on b5 and potentially also the pawn on d5, it's one of these positions where objectively black is probably able to hold without too much trouble if he finds a few more good moves. But still, it's not so straightforward, where in the game the move bishop c3 probably wasn't the best one in hindsight, where I think the correct move order would be to play the move queen at e7 first. So that if rook b5, we have the queen e2 fork to kind of turn the tables on black, on white, I should say. Actually, it's such an instructive variation, I should show you the full sequence, so we actually can play queen e1 and give a checkmate with bishop d4, and this is a really nice trick that sort of keeps black in the game. Of course, white doesn't have to allow queen e2. They can cover it with queen b5. But now the difference is that bishop to c3 is available, and there's this very computerish idea of playing bishop to e1, attacking that pawn from behind. And white can defend it, but then their king is a bit open, and black ends up getting pretty decent compensation thanks to the exposed position of white's king. You can cover with queen d3, but yeah, white's edge is very much at a minimum here. Whereas the difference with bishop c3 is, white can now just play rook b5, because we don't have the queen e2 resource anymore. Rook f2 was a nice attempt by Nakamura, realizing that, king f2 would run into queen h4, and that, black would actually have a draw here with bishop d4, takes rook e1 as mate, but king h1, bishop e5, and white is basically going to end up sort of, running into a perpetual attack, like queen e3 and, this sort of thing, and white just can't get out of the checks, like king f1 will run into queen f4 specifically here. So instead, white found a very nice defense. Rook b takes d5, and after queen h4, another good move, queen d3, just keeping things defended, attacking the bishop to slow black's playdown. Rook f6 is the trick that you can't take the bishop without running into a back rank mate, but intermediate move g3 does cover that, and at this point, if white plays correctly, he is a pawn up, and he does have the better bishop in the long term. He just needs to find the way to consolidate the king to really have a close to decisive advantage. And the move Caruana played, king g2, is not bad per se, but I do think that rook f1 first, and playing to focus everything against the d7 pawn by trading off the defender in the f6 rook is probably what gave white by far the best chance to win the game. After king g2, bishop b2, white still has a chance here where, it's still not too late to play rook f1 or to, play rook d7 and start to use the principle of two weaknesses, combining the weakness of f7 with the passed pawn to distract black's forces a bit. Here as well, I think white has very good chances to win in a position like this, but you'll probably go rook f1 next move and, just, again, apply the pressure against f7. Because if they do move the pawn, then, that does also weaken the black king quite a bit. And, an ending like this would indeed, I think, give white very good winning chances with the two passed pawns on the queen side. But the game instead saw rook f5, which is safe, but also kind of, loses most of white's advantage. And for the rest of the game, both sides just played very well. Like, white has an extra pawn, but, rook a8 is kind of a nice little trick that queen a8, queen e2 will be, regaining the rook or even just giving a perpetual, as it were. So white played rook d5 to defend the pawn, but rook a7, black has played very solidly, putting the pressure against this pawn, eyeing up some queen d2 checks, rook d5, queen c7, and black just took the pawn back immediately with rook a5, where white does win the pawn on f7 here, but it turns out it just doesn't really matter that the position is so simplified, and more importantly, the white king is so exposed here that white really struggles to avoid a perpetual check. After queen e7, the pure opposite colored bishop ending is just a clearly dead draw with the blockade on the on the dark squares. And after queen c4 and queen e3, we stop queen f4 check, and given that white can't really make progress when his king is this open, the draw was agreed at this point. So, fairly well played game for the most part. It's true that, Caruana did have one opportunity later on after Hikaru missed this very nice queen e7 and, bishop c3 idea, which is, not so easy to see, of course. But interesting game despite it ultimately ending in a draw. The game between Abasov against Nepomniachtchi was one that was probably, let's say, the least interesting game of the match, as it were, or of the round so far. Yeah, my window did something kind of really weird there that I didn't really expect, but it's all sorted now. But this game between Abasov against Nepomniachtchi was probably, I would say, the least interesting game of the round, so we're going to be relatively brief in our coverage of it. Black has a lot of good moves they can play, like after castles and knight f3, you can choose between like the TMB if you want to just play very flexibly, and then there's our Lasker system if you want to like just equalize and make solid draw, and knight d7 is kind of somewhere in between the two systems, let's say. But black goes d takes c4, which, yeah, started to become popular in the last 10 years or so, where you just play like very positionally and just go for this IQP position where the bishop is maybe not absolutely ideal on h4, because in some lines black will be able to, for example, play a move like knight h5 and just trade off the bishops and, bring the knight back to f6 and have a very solid grip over the d5 square. The bishop can just come around this way, and white doesn't really have any sort of advantage here, let's say. I think the move Nepo played at a6 is probably his attempt to try to keep a bit more play in the position and potentially outplay his opponent, who, after all, is the lowest rated player in the field by about 100 points or so. But, Abasov, rook c1 is maybe not the best move here, like a3 and bring the bishop to a2 definitely seems a bit more natural by comparison. But yeah, I mean, this would also be fine for black most likely, where you can even just try to engineer a trade on b4 to have a good grip over the d5 square as such, which is often a key theme in these positions. Rook c1, yeah, maybe not the most precise, but I think it would be too strong to call an outright mistake. But I think that here white sort of realized that if he were to play kind of routine moves, he could end up in some trouble. Like, let's say you play queen to d3, for example, and you're just running into knight b4, and you already after queen e3, bishop f3, we can see that, either you take with the pawn and your structure is just horrible here, or you take with the queen, but then you lose the pawn on d4, which is probably actually worse, believe it or not. So we can kind of see, it's not so easy for white to find natural developing moves, like knight e5 move you want to play, but then the d4 pawn hangs. Again, queen d2, knight a5, also some problems here. So Abasov, to his credit, realized he should just try to play for a draw and just trade off everything with takes and d5. And yeah, some good little calculation here to realize that bishop e2 is not just winning a pawn, because we do have rook c6 and a nice little tactic here. It allows us to, have the two minor pieces for the rook and pawn. Two knight pieces, of course, being better than the rook and pawn, usually by close to a point on average. But yeah, of course, black isn't going to fall for this in a candidates. And yeah, with knight a5, I mean, the position is still a tiny bit better for black here. The reason being that if we play out a few more moves, we'll see that, at this point, like, black does have the bishop versus a knight, but the position is just so solid for white with no real weaknesses, it's kind of hard to really make anything of it. After bishop d5, f3, takes. It's a rook ending where black has a slightly better structure, but it's just incredibly hard to make anything of it. Like, it's hard to really get at the doubled pawns when on the half-open file. And yeah, the rest of the game was just both sides just playing healthily. White just kept offering a trade of rooks, because yeah, if you do take it, it's going to be a pretty clear draw when the white king is, going to be more active than its counterpart, which offsets, the worst pawn structure in a situation like this. I mean, the pawn being isolated isn't that big of a deal when, when you don't have the rooks on the board, but I mean, Nepo also realized it's just nothing here and, played his repeated moves and just made a draw as such. So not too much to see here, but, nice to see, Abasov holding his own against one of the favorites of the tournament. After all, Nepomniachtchi did win the candidates the last two times, so he has the results under his belt in a sense in this format. This game between Firouzja against Praggnanandhaa, I think, was actually the most interesting one of this round. And you can already tell by the opening choice, that black was ready to kind of fight. He didn't just play, something like the Marshal, for example, which is, very much aimed at just neutralizing white's first move advantage and, just making a solid draw by kind of knowing your theory. No, Pragg instead decided to go knight e4 and get a much more fighting game with some imbalance, which certainly as spectators we very much appreciate. Bishop e6, c3 is one of the main lines. Knight d2 is the other main approach you'll see, but the positions after knight c5, c3, d4 have been kind of worked out to equality after a lot of depth. So c3 is kind of a way to try to keep a bit more play in the position. You could also put the bishop on c5, but Pragg decided to play the more solid bishop to e7. White played the move bishop c2, again sort of anticipating knight c5, which again would follow with knight b to d2. And black in turn plays the move bishop g4, quite a precise move, because if you do castle and let white go knight b d2 here, well, now black's not in time to get in d4 anymore, and if you play f5, white can sort of just go knight b3 and basically use the weakness of the black dark squares to his advantage, and white would have a small but quite pleasant edge. So bishop g4 is a nice way to avoid that problem, and Firouzja showed his fighting spirit where he played this quite interesting move of queen e1 that at first glance might seem very weird, but the point is that you're actually not too perturbed by the double pawns here. If they play knight g5, just queen e2 just keeps it defended. Note, by the way, that knight e5 is not winning a pawn here, because we have the intermezzo of bishop g5 that is going to win a piece when the dust settles. So that's going to be safe, and if knight c5, well, we can even play like f4 in the worst case, and our king is really not so exposed. Like, we can tuck away on h1, and the bishop pair does count for a lot here as white. So black plays knight c5, playing a bit more solidly. Knight bd2, knight e6 is the move black played in the game, which is sort of anticipating some ideas like knight d4 or knight b3 and trying to bring the knight around this way. So knight e6, king h1, just a little bit of a flexible move, kind of waiting to see what black does. But, if they do play a move like castles, you can play this nice idea of knight g1, which sort of clears the way for that pawn to start ramming down the board, and the bishop also can then be in some danger of being trapped. So to avoid this, black plays the move bishop h5, a nice little idea that now knight g1 doesn't really come in time, like bishop g6, and of course black is very happy to trade off his more or less active bishop for white's more active bishop in a sense. Okay, active isn't the right word, but like black's pawns are on the light squares and white's pawns are on the dark squares. So it's in black's best interest to trade off the light square bishops in this opening. And in turn, Firouzja played a nice move, knight b3, which is clearing the way for knight fd4. It also means when black does play bishop f3 is in the game, well, he lost the tempo playing the move bishop h5, so it's not as serious. And bishop g5 is an important move to stop f4. We had rook g1, take, and it's still a very interesting and very unbalanced position here after rook g4, queen h5, knight d3, where on the one hand, white does have a bit more space and has the g file for some dynamic play, but black also has a very solid position where, he's blockading things, the white does have double pawns, so it's a position where the engine will tell you, like, queen e3, and it's roughly close to equal, with maybe white having a tiny edge in a position like this, let's say. But it's very, very complex, like definitely a position where the stronger player has a lot of scope to outplay the opponent. And queen e2 was played in a game where, maybe I like the move queen e3, marginally better, but the difference is not so great. Black played f5, and obviously you want to open things up when you have the bishop versus the knight, and, it is true the pawns are doubled and isolated, but, white does have some open lines to work with, and white played the move f4, trying to, make something happen, like maybe you can try to support the knight coming to e5 or the queen coming along this way. So it opens up some options, and there weren't really any big opportunities. Actually, it's not true. There were a couple of small opportunities white had in the game, but here black has many decent moves. Like, I think the thing that jumps out at me is that the rook on a is kind of the one piece for black that is not really involved in the game. So I think I would either go rook a f8 and attack the pawn this way, or I'd play rook e8 and put the rook opposite the queen, and either way I think the position is probably dynamically balanced. Rook h6 is sort of an example of some minor forcing itis where it's not an awful move by any means, but f3 is kind of a move white's fairly happy to play anyway, to just consolidate the position and prepare for the queen maybe to come over this way into the attack. Queen f7 is a nice move by black. Queen g3, rook h5 is preparing to bring the rook around this way. White played the move a4, then trying to create some little weaknesses on the queen side. Rook hf6 hits h2, white defends rook e2. Rook h3, and I quite like this move that Firouzja played here, bringing the queen to e1, and sort of inviting black to kind of take this pawn on f3 as a bit of a sacrifice. Now, black's not forced to take it. They could play a solid move like queen h5 or queen f6, which would sort of keep the kind of equilibrium. The knight could also come around into the attack this way, again with a Position engine gives a 0-0-0, but from a human point of view is very, very complex. But yeah, in the game, Black did decide to take the pawn, showing his fighting spirit. And in turn, White played a very nice move of knight c5. This was Firouzja's trick, realizing that takes and rook e8 would indeed, win the queen as such. Black now played this move of queen h5, which, yeah, it's sort of a nice idea trying to sort of counterattack, but probably the most solid is just to play knight f8. And, White can play takes and f5 and definitely has compensation for the material. The fact that the g7 pawn is fixed is quite nice, but it's, still the game goes on. It's still a position where anything can happen. But queen h5, yeah, does kind of give White that little bit of an opportunity here, where, White could have played the move of rook eg2, but it's still a very complex position. Like, Black can... Like, this is where it gets a little bit crazy in terms of engine variations, because, yeah, obviously you can't let White get the, rook g7 in. But maybe Firouzja was concerned about something like knight e5, which, yeah, it looks like a bit of a crazy move at first glance. Rook e, queen e5 would run into rook f1 and, checkmate as such. That's the first point. And the second point is after f takes e5 that, Black can play queen f7, threatening the rook f1. And then after bishop d3, playing knight c5. And yeah, it's a really crazy position. Like after takes, if you play queen takes g7 here, like Black is, actually going to be okay in this position after king f7 takes and rook d3, where the rooks might look a little bit weirdly placed, but there's no real way to set up a fork with the queen against the king and the rook, and Black is going to have some threats with the rooks lining up very soon, and that is going to allow Black to hold in this case. But it turns out White has this very nice move of queen g1. Very hard move to see, and probably the move that both the players overlooked here, as is definitely very computerish to just play very unforcing. After knight e6, take, yeah, it does turn out that with queen g5, White does get a pretty strong initiative here, like queen d8, and Black's not lost per se, but sorry, not king f7 because that would be a fork, but yeah, the move of rook f8 rather, and yeah, after queen d5, like White is better, but it's not like game over by any means. Despite White having quite a nice material advantage of two pawns and a queen for the two rooks, the White king is quite exposed. So I mean, White still has his work cut out to turn this into a win, and even here with perfect play, Black can probably hold with the counterplay against the against the White king. But yeah, would be a different story, let's say. And in the game after knight e6, queen g4, knight g5. Well, first glance it might seem like we're just threatening mate and also the rook, but in the game, Prague found a very beautiful defense of knight to e5, realizing that f takes e5 runs into queen takes g5, which does win the exchange for Black. Knight f3 would run into queen f3, and this would actually just be winning for Black once again, where you can't play rook e5 sadly because take, and yeah, Black can just play like well, in the worst case, play like queen f4 and just line everything up here. Actually, if you have to queen f4, you have to go back and forth anyway. But yeah, basically from this point, you will be able to play queen to h1 as the key move, and then rook h2, and yeah, a bit of a complex variation, of course. But yeah, basically, you are going to win the queen at the end of this sequence, and the king will just kind of run up the board to ultimately get out of these checks. As you can see here, the checks just eventually peter out for White at some point. So, of course, the players saw this, and they were short of time, but yeah, have very good calculation, of course. And Firouzja handled it correctly. He took the knight, and now Black showed the other point of his combination with take, queen h5, and yeah, there's just no way out of the perpetual check. And yeah, this is just a game ending in a draw by threefold repetition. So that's the third game. Let's conclude with the final game of this round, played between Gukesh against Vidit. And this was a game that was definitely quite exciting before it kind of petered out a bit later. But yeah, in this game, Vidit went for a little bit of a surprise in the Tarrasch defense with c5. Not something you'd normally expect in the candidates, but we already saw, like in the previous game, like Praggnanandhaa being willing to play some systems that are not like the absolute hardcore main line, but still a very respectable system, of course. And yeah, Tarrasch as well. We see White not going into these lines like the von Hennig Gambit or the systems with this sort of thing. After which the Dubov Tarrasch is kind of what has sort of revitalized the Tarrasch as a serious opening for Black at high levels. But yeah, Gukesh just plays e3, just heading back to the semi-Tarrasch and just getting a position to play. Very much in Gukesh's style, let's say. Now, if you have experience in the Queen's Gambit accepted, which actually Vidit does, you can just play takes and you can kind of transpose back into this opening. White's committed to set up with a3 and knight c3, which is not one of the absolute main lines, let's say. But in the game, Black played a6, sort of going for a little bit more of a tense position with b4 and bishop to d6 here. In the past, I used to play bishop a7 more and try to get in the move d4. But bishop b6 is a little bit more of a wrinkle where you just kind of keep the bishop sort of on this diagonal. And yeah, here Gukesh went for a bit of a creative approach. Like the normal way to play would just be bishop b2, castle take, and just play this IQP position, which kind of has some contours like almost an IMSO or QGD, but with an extra tempo for White. But instead, Gukesh wanted to play it very creatively, and this rook a2 and swing rook this way definitely leads to quite an exciting battle ahead where, to Vidit's credit, he also found a very good response here in knight to e5. And, based on the time usage, we can sort of say that the players were still in their preparation at this point. Castle's also kind of a point that, you can't really save the pawn because of the pin on the bishop. But we can still do something about it. The move a5 is a very nice move to kind of disrupt White's coordination a little bit. With b5, there's queen e7, and we can, attack the pawn a3 to slow White down a little in this case. And if you do play like queen a1, insisting on trying to win the pawn, Black is going to get some pretty good play based on the somewhat exposed position of White's king and some of the weaknesses evident in the pawn structure. But yeah, that would be a bit of a different sequence. And you could also play c5. That would be quite ambitious, and it'd be interesting to see which way Vidit was intending to move the bishop, because you could sort of make an argument, I think, for all of the bishop moves at this point. But yeah, in the game, White played cd5, and that doesn't really give Black an opportunity to play a takes b4 here, where, say, a b4, ed5 is actually a little bit awkward for White in terms of how to defend the pawn. So I'm guessing maybe Gukesh was going to play like d6 and try to sort of make things happen in that way. I was just getting my breakfast delivered to me. So anyway, we had bc3, and this is one way the game could play out. And yeah, very sharp position, but one where Black does appear to be doing quite well, where the c3 pawn does really stymie White quite a bit. And yeah, very messy position, but one where I would probably give a small preference to Black. I think the Black's lead development and the weak king are sort of outweighing the White bishop pair a little bit at this point. I guess White is up a pawn, but yeah, it's sort of hard to fully consolidate somehow as White. Whereas Black, yeah, can sort of just develop and just have very good play in the long term. In some lines, you can even play moves like bishop c4 and like try and trade off the White bishop pair that way too. But in the game, Black played the move e5. And yeah, it sort of gets back a bit more to normal territory. Well, it's not funny to say normal, because even here, this position of the Rosing game is still pretty crazy. And yeah, after queen c2, kind of interesting to see that White is not going for, bishop e5 and this order of moves. But, kind of, I guess he just didn't want to have a very open position with the king on e1. Like, the engine says it's fine, like there's just equal. But yeah, it definitely looks a little bit scary from the human point of view. So one thing also I should mention, like you'll often have like queen b2 as a resource to trade the queen. This is one that kind of keeps White afloat here. But yeah, after queen c2, Black could still play the move knight d5. They could also play rook e8 and just kind of keep the tension a bit more. I mean, with rook e8, I do think Black does have probably the better side of equality, but it's a bit of a messy position, like hard to know exactly what's going on with, so many imbalances, and White king also is a little bit weak in the long term, but yeah, we can kind of keep offering a trade of queens and sort of defend ourselves in that way. But in the game, Black played bishop g4, which is definitely a very beautiful move in this position. The idea of the move is that first of all, you can't take the bishop directly because after rook c8, queen d3, and knight e4, well, you have some problems with your pieces kind of coming under fire. Also, it's a very computerish solution where you can actually go rook a1 and just like sacrifice a full rook, but just have a completely crushing attack because of this attack on the queen. Looks very computerish, so it's kind of to Vidit's credit that he came up with this idea after a very long fought. Like he fought for 40 minutes over this move. But you could say it was time fairly well spent because, here at this point, Gukesh already just said, I've had enough here. Let's just repeat the moves and, just force the draw as it happened. But you might be wondering, what if white takes the bishop now? And it's definitely possible, but after rook c8, it's very hard to defend this bishop, where if you play rook d3, then the move e4 comes and because obviously white fails to successfully defend the bishop in a sense. Meaning white would have to basically bail out with queen b2, and in this case black is, I would say, on the better side of this endgame. Like white can hold it, but black is basically has got a lot of threats, and white's the one who has the onus to hold. So Gukesh made the right decision just to take the draw and just end the game then and there. So it's a game where if you look at this round, sure, if you just go on the results, it's maybe not the most interesting round in a certain sense. But we could see that the players were still here to fight. Like the game Caruana-Nakamura did give white some little opportunities and some nice ideas that came up. And also the Firouzja-Praggnanandhaa game had a lot of interesting moments, and even this one here featured definitely the move of the day in this bishop g4, which, might not be the top line of the engine, but definitely have to give black credit for a really fertile imagination here. That's round one of the candidates, and probably a good moment also for me to sort of share my prediction of who I think is going to win, where I definitely think that with the plays here, it's definitely going to be a more interesting candidates, despite round one being all draws. I think the players are going to all really fight quite hard and definitely really play for the first place in a certain sense. And also it's kind of thing like when you have like a player like Abasov who is like rated well below the others, it means that like every round you're going to have at least one game where the players are kind of trying to beat him in a sense. It's kind of like what you see in some of the more successful round robins in general, like the invitationals, that are not just going to have like all players in the top 10, but they have like sort of like a local hero or a player like a bit lower rated, like maybe 2,700 or a bit below that, to sort of at least ensure there'll be some interesting rounds of that little bit of a like difference in rating of like the higher rated player going for the win, even potentially with the black pieces as such. Which I think will be a very interesting tournament. I think that most likely it'll be a two-horse race between Caruana and Nakamura, where I think that if that round one game between them had ended decisively, then I think whoever wins that game probably would win the tournament. But as it was a draw, we definitely keep a lot of suspense still in the event. And it'll be interesting to see how things transpire. But I think that Caruana is a slight favourite and Nakamura is a very, very close second, with like Nepo sort of being somewhat distant third and Firouzja kind of like the outside chance for fourth. It's not to say that the young talents aren't going to necessarily do well, but I think that it's not necessarily their time yet to sort of win this one. That it really helps to have like that experience of a candidates event that you've played before, like so you're kind of used to it for this next time, as it were. It's also probably the best chance for like Caruana or Nakamura to become the world champion, by winning candidates and then beating Ding in the world championship match. Because I think in 2 years' time, you're going to see like quite a few of these talents knocking on the door of like 2,800 plus. Like Abdus-Satorov is already, rated over 2,770 FIDE. So it's really, kind of a now or never moment almost for some of these players. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And let me know in the comments below what was your favorite move or your favorite moment of this recap. And if you are interested in private lessons with me, just feel free to reach out to me via the links below, like via messenger or email works fine. I'll put a link here in the description as I mentioned. And I will see you in the next one. So until then, take care.